Welcome to the Altair Aerospace Coffee Breaks. So grab a coffee and have a seat. Today we are going to start our series with just the basics. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the 2022 version that has just been released. And the biggest thing you're going to notice here is that we don't really parse out any of the tools anymore. So I did a very detailed install on my computer. But what we're really looking for is this HyperWorks 2022. And the first thing that we're going to notice is this HyperWorks 2022. The first things that it's going to do is it's going to launch what we call a launcher. So this is going to be how we will get to different tools within HyperWorks. I mean, HyperView if we want to do post-processing, HyperGraph for graphing, or kind of the traditional HyperMesh for model build and prep. Okay. Within this framework, you can pick a recent model or a recent session file. You can also pick the user profile that you'd like. Remember, so HyperWorks is solver neutral. You can set up decks for all of the major commercial solvers. So I'm just going to leave these as they are. And if you don't like this popping up, you don't have to show this again and have the extra mouse clicks. You can just set this once and be done. Okay. So today's topic is going to be all about bringing in a model, right? So importing a model and then some of the initial things that you do when a model comes in, whether that's going to be some interrogation or model cleanup. So now that HyperWorks is loaded, the question is how do we bring in geometry, a solver deck, how do we bring in any of the myriad of things that we can within HyperWorks? And to answer that, we can go to File, and we have all of our open and import options here. So import is an append process. So if you already had a model in here and you wanted to import more items, you can import. And open is going to be kind of a new session. So it's going to close out your current model and open a new one. Okay. We'll have a recent list here, and these items can be pinned as well. So if you find yourself coming back to a few common models, you can go ahead and pin those if you'd like, and those will always stay on here. Our second option is to just drag and drop a model into the GUI here. Okay. So from here, let me just go to my desktop. I have a model here already. This is from the Wichita State from NIAR. Actually did a really great job on this model. So give them lots of credit for this. They created a complete light aircraft for us, kind of a general aviation aircraft. So you can see I have lots of CAP parts here, got lots of CAP products. I could bring in the whole thing. I don't technically really want to bring in the whole thing. I just kind of want to bring in this vertical tail assembly is what I'm looking for. Okay, so from the Windows Explorer, I can just drag and drop this into the GUI, and once I do that, we will apply all the necessary readers that come from that file extension. Okay. So CATIA is a pretty common one. There are some options in here. As soon as you kind of drag and drop or import this part, you have the ability to use the CAD units that are in the model, where you can specify your own unit system. And then another one that's going to come up later is the ability to import the composite data from a CATIA file. So obviously with Aero moving to composites, this is probably going to become more and more common. This is just a great way to have less redundancy of bringing in the composites and modeling them. So we'll talk composites later on in our series. So I'm going to leave everything by default and go ahead and hit open. And this will go ahead and open this CAP product file for us. Okay. So when it comes in, the first instinct that everyone has is just move the model, manipulate it a little bit. Okay. So with this, you can just kind of move this part around. What I'm doing is right-click will pan, left and right, up and down. Pressing the middle mouse button on your mouse will allow you to tumble the model, and then scrolling the middle mouse button will allow you to zoom in and out. Okay, so right-click pan, scroll, and then middle mouse will tumble. And depending on where you click your middle mouse, we're going to tumble about that area. So you can see I'll tumble about this far left corner, or if I wanted to tumble about this close right corner, I'll just middle mouse and then start to tumble around there. Okay. And then if you're out in the middle of nowhere, we'll just kind of tumble around the CG. So now that we're kind of a little familiar with that, that's probably the first biggest change that you're going to notice to this new interface with HyperWorks, is that you no longer have to use two hands to control the model. The second biggest change is what we're going to be calling idle mode, right? And idle mode is going to be where you are within the tool that's not actually in, a tool or a process or what we used to call panels, right? So idle mode is just the state in which you can select things on the GUI, right? Just by left clicking, much like you would in any Windows application. Okay. Kind of left clicking on the products or on the parts, and then if you hover over them, you'll start to get some little tooltips by your mouse, depending on all sorts of things that are within your model. We will display, node IDs, property values, different types of things as this model gets built. Okay. So this is the idle mode, and all of your selection is going to be controlled at the top left. So this is the other thing that kind of takes the longest to get used to, is that a hypermesh deck or a hypermesh model can contain all sorts of different things. It obviously can contain CAD, it can contain mesh, nodes and elements, loads and boundary conditions, all sorts of different things. And the ability to select those things is going to be controlled up here at the top left. Okay. So if you only are looking to select solids, or if you're only looking to select lines, all of those options will be here, and they're all parsed based on what's in your model. So I don't see any nodes or elements because there's nothing meshed in this model. Okay, it's all geometry. Okay. So I'm going to change my selector to solids. So now when I go and select a part, you'll see a count of that part. And this is the solid that I have selected. So I'll kind of zoom in. It's just this skin, right? Back skin of this tail. And now that everything is kind of controlled via left click and right click, we have all sorts of different advanced and more selection options, and essentially show and hide is going to be covered by right click now. Okay, so if I have something selected and then I say right click, I will be able to either hide that part or isolate it, or even copy and paste that part. And then advanced selections, right? So if I wanted this and then everything, this solid and everything attached to it, I could do those different types of selections. Okay. So that's all available via right click. So kind of your first key is I'd like you to kind of treat this as more of a traditional Microsoft product, where left click would be a selection, even a drag box selection. A control will append to your selection. Okay. I wanted to select 3 different items, I would hold control on the keyboard. And then all of our other operations are going to kind of be through right click, right? So whether that's I want to hide all of these skins that I've selected, just to kind of see the internal structure of this tail. Right. So getting used to some of this showing and hiding is just something that's going to happen over the course of these, these coffee breaks. You'll just get more and more familiar with this, more and more comfortable. And as you get more and more comfortable, you'll start to realize that a lot of these operations are controlled by hotkeys. So now that your left hand is free from model manipulation, from just zooming and scrolling and panning, you're able to use your left hand, I guess if you're right-handed, I suppose, on the keyboard for hotkeys. But I'm going to avoid using hotkeys in this series, just so when we go back and look at the recordings, you'll be able to kind of have a little more step-by-step process of what I did. Because I'm not smart enough to do, I don't know how to do the keys on the screen and that type of stuff. So after we bring in a model, right, whether that's CAD, whether it's an old bulk data file of some sort, there's usually a good chance, especially if it's CAD, that we're going to want to do some cleanup, right? So even though we are in the 21st century, there is usually a case where the geometry does not come in cleanly, right? Whether that means a solid isn't completely closed or bound by surfaces, or there's little breaks And it's not necessarily a designer's fault. It could be an export issue. It could even be an import issue from HyperWorks. It's just kind of one of the things that we need to discuss. And it's usually one of the first topics that we talk about is bring your model in, move it around, and you want to make sure that you can clean up the geometry. Right? So this model done by Nayar, like I said, is actually quite good. So there's really not much geometry cleanup that I can do here. So I actually made a similar but separate model that I can just open up here, where I went in and had to do some removal of some things to make it dirty. Okay, I mean not dirty, just not clean. So I brought this. This is the same part, just a few issues here and there have been introduced to the geometry. Okay. And as far as geometry goes, we do have a full ribbon. That's what we'll call this top area. This full ribbon of different geometry, edit, fixing, creation, different type of tools. Okay. So some of them are going to be pretty straightforward, and we'll use them throughout this series. But the one that you're going to be looking for mostly for cleanup, that's going to probably fix about 95% of your issues, is going to be the stitch tool right here. Okay. So the stitch tool, as soon as I go in and select the stitch tool, by default, we put you into this automatic color mode. And this color mode is showing you the topology of how the surfaces are stitched together. Okay. You might be able to deduce that, just from life, that green is usually a good sign and red is usually a bad sign, and we'll treat that the same way here. And this topology is no different than the classic version either. But as soon as I switch this topology, I can kind of start to see, I see some red, and remember I said red is bad. But for a large assembly, sometimes it's really hard to focus in and find these areas of concern. So what we do within the stitch tool is we do allow you to kind of turn off some of the noise that you're not necessarily concerned with. Okay. So what I usually do is I'll turn off these shared edges just for now, and it starts to make the red edges a little more apparent, right? But it's hard to see if there's any issues, say, in this midsection of this part because everything's been covered up. So the next thing that I usually do when I'm looking to kind of clean up my model is I go down to this bottom little toolbar, and this bottom toolbar controls a lot of the visualization. So a lot of how things are colored, a lot of how things are shown on the screen. And one of the things that we can do is we can turn all of these surfaces to wireframe. Okay. So as soon as I turn the surfaces to wireframe, it becomes a little more apparent that maybe there's some more issues than just the two that I originally saw. I start to see this little red patch in the middle. And then the last thing that's showing on my screen here are the vertices. So these are all the edge points of the surfaces, and sometimes those just get in the way. Again, that's a visualization option, and the visualization options can be controlled on this bottom toolbar. So I can turn off all of these display points. Okay. And then I start to see where my issues lie, right? So I kind of have these three little regions in which I had to go and make some bad geometry. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hit escape on my keyboard. I'm going to get out of this stitch tool, so I can either hit escape or I can just select the tool again. And it does bring me back to kind of this view state, which we might think is a little odd at first, but it actually does allow us to do something kind of unique. So we can still vaguely see some of these lines. They're not in the topology color mode because we're not in a tool that necessarily warrants topology. All of the coloring can be overridden down here. Okay, but everything's on automatic, and everything's on automatic by default, so I'm going to leave it on automatic because that's how yours should work. But you can always override it at any point. But what I can actually see is I see these lines, these edges are still kind of available. So I'm going to change my idle selector that was on solids, and now I'm going to change it to lines. Okay. And what I like to do is I'd like to just drag a box around those lines. Okay. So there's 17 lines. So even some of the ones that we can't necessarily see, they're going to get all picked up in that box. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to just isolate those lines, right? So similar to the view that I had originally, but when I isolate these lines, isolate, right click and isolate. I'm actually going to get the associated geometry with them, right? Because these are all edges. These are surface edges. And I kind of get this a little more adaptable view, right? I can actually kind of see what's going on. So now as I start to look at where some of these errors lie, obviously there was a missing fillet surface here. Okay, kind of see that pretty easily. I believe there's another missing surface over here on this part. You see it's a big blink. And then over here, we kind of see that there's like a little split. Right? So maybe not a missing surface, it's just maybe this wasn't equivalenced or there was some missing constraint in the CAD and this just kind of got messed up. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my stitch tool now, now that I kind of have isolated these. So that's just kind of a little trick for finding and kind of isolating where these areas of concern could be. Okay. So the stitch tool, like many tools, the stitch tool is going to have kind of a one-line sentence of what it can do. It says, click on edges, select surfaces to stitch. Okay, that might not mean a whole lot. We do have a little extra drop down, so most of the tools here have additional help within the tool without having to leave to go to an external help document. So we can read that. It gives you some of the additional hotkeys or workflows that you can work through. But a lot of the tools also have this little GIF or GIF, I'm never 100% sure how to say that, that kind of shows you some of the other operations in a little video form, because probably one of the reasons that we're here is we learn much better in instructional video form. So this is kind of showing you all of the different things that this one tool can do, right? So this one tool has kind of put into place a few different workflows that we can kind of take a look at. So I'm going to zoom in to this little area here. And one of the workflows that I have is the ability to select a point and replace another point. Okay, so I can select this point with left click and drag to another point that I'd like it to be stitched to, right? And we kind of see this preview as this part is moving along. So just left click and drag to this other point, and that geometry gets closed up. Okay, I'm going to turn on my shared edges again so you can kind of see that what did happen is there was a split, and then I took that one point and I brought it on over to the other side. I'm going to Control Z a couple times, so on my keyboard just undo. And another operation, so instead of doing point to point, I could actually grab the line and do a line replace. So I can grab this line and drag it to the other line, right? So I can drag one line to another line. So I could do a point replace, or I can do a line replace, and all of the places that I'm moving to are going to be retained. So you can think of this idea of what's moved and what's retained via the drag operation. Okay. So that kind of fixed that split. This other one over here. So we look at this, and us as humans kind of understand that this should probably not exist. This is just a computer thing. Maybe some rounding error to some 10th decimal place. But these surfaces should be stitched together. However, HyperMesh is saying that they're not. This red line indicates that they're not stitched together. Therefore, that means that there is some type of break between these two surfaces. Okay. So the stitch tool allows us to kind of select multiple surfaces in an area, and then anything that's within a search tolerance, and that search tolerance is going to be controlled up here, is going to be stitched together. Right? So I can go ahead and hit stitch, and you'll just see, because those two lines, those two edges lay within the search tolerance, within that selection, they're going to go ahead and get stitched together. Okay. And then the final thing that you can do is you can just simply click on a surface, an edge, and within that search tolerance, once again, it's just going to go ahead and equivalence everything towards it. And that edge that you click is retained. And at any point, if you need to, you can always undo. You can always undo and try the process over with a different method. Okay, so undo is available globally throughout all of the tools. Okay, so that fixes that part. Like I said, this stitch tool will do about 90% of the work for us, okay, or 95% of the work. But every now and then we need to go and make a surface. We need to kind of patch something up. The stitch tool just really isn't going to work here. Okay, so I can hit escape to get out of the stitch tool, and I'm going to go to the surfaces tool over here at the very top of our ribbon once again. And we have a couple cool new tools that aren't available in really the older versions. And the first one that we're going to use is called Patch. Okay. So once again, kind of a one-liner, and also this drop-down help within the tool itself. What we can actually do is we can hit Find, and this will actually go ahead and kind of show these patches in bright red. Okay. Not only will it show the patches, you can also go ahead and say we'll close them up. Okay, just by selecting that patch. Okay, so this will go and find holes. This will go and find all sorts of different things. I'm going to undo. I think I can go edit, undo. Yeah. Okay, so I can undo because the find tool is cool, but it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of cheating. But obviously you can find all of them and you can patch them all at one point if you'd like. But let's kind of do another process here. The patch tool will also allow you, if we look at this little video, right, you can find them and you can close them all up if you'd like. You can also click and drag, and it shows a little preview there. So that's what I want to show here, is this ability to say click on a line, and as I drag it, you're going to kind of get this preview of a surface that's made, right? So it doesn't really matter where I drag this line to. It's going to show you a preview of the surface that it wants to make. So if I snap to this line that kind of on the far right-hand side, obviously that's not the surface we want to make, but with the preview, I know that's not the surface I want to make. So I'm going to come back here to this other edge of the fillet, and I'm just clicking and holding, left clicking and holding, by the way, to kind of get this preview state. But as soon as I find this line and the preview looks good, I will unselect. I will kind of lift off of the mouse, and once again we'll see that fillet is made, and everything has been stitched together. So I see green everywhere, which means these surfaces are connected. Okay. The last thing that you can do with this tool is you can just select the edges. Okay. Bound edges, and once you have them bound, you can go ahead and hit Patch, and it will create this surface for you. Okay. I see that this line is still red, so maybe I need to come back and stitch, because me as a human being understands that really should just be equivalents together, right? There was probably some mathematical numeric issue that just we couldn't resolve, so you just go in and can come and stitch back together to patch that surface up. Okay. So that's just kind of a little introduction of some of the things that we can do with some geometry cleanup and geometry import. We're going to do a lot more cleanup and editing of geometry when we start looking at mid-surfaces next week. And obviously we'll get more and more familiar with this interface as we go along. But this would be a good kind of starting point for learning how to bring models in, and then starting to practice with some of the manipulation and this idle mode, right? This idea of not having to be in a tool to be able to perform, query, show, hide, those type of things to kind of get your model in the right spot. Right. With that, I will talk to everyone next week. Thanks.